The Stars and Stripes show is brought to you by the U.S. Embassy.
Well, it's Cabs FM, powered to engage your world, and welcome to the Stars and Stripes radio show, proudly brought to you by the U.S. Embassy and, of course, hashtag America in Botswana. And the objective of this particular show, as rightfully said, is to highlight the bilateral relationship between the U.S. government and, of course, the BW government. Now, listen up. Climate change is no longer solely an environmental concern. It has emerged as a pressing security threat. And as the Earth's climate rapidly transforms, it poses significant risk to global stability, exacerbating conflicts, fueling resource scarcity, and displacing populations. This escalating crisis demands for urgent attention and collective action to safeguard our shared future. And of course, recently I was out at the Climate Change Symposium. I had the honor of speaking to a phenomenal man. He goes by the name General Kenneth Ekman. Look out for that conversation, and this was our conversation. Now, the BDF, Wena Samantha, and the U.S. government have teamed up together. Did you know that climate change poses a security threat for national security?
Look, I had no idea. You know, we think climate change and we never correlate it to security in any way, shape or form.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's what we're going to be discussing today. This was the interview between myself and General Kenneth Ekman. We're talking to about AFRICOM Climate Change Symposium right here in Gaborone, Botswana. And I've got some special guests for us because the Stars and Stripes radio show is on the road. We are officially at the AFRICOM Security Implications of Climate Change Conference right here in Gaborone, Botswana. We've got some big names with us today. Joining us all the way from Germany is General Kenneth Ekman. He is the Director, Strategy, Engagement and Programs, U.S. Africa Command, also known as AFRICOM, joining us today. Welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, Swift. Thanks so much for having me on the show. It is so great to be here in Gaborone, Botswana.
Fantastic. Is it your first time in the city?
It is my first time in the country, much less the city.
Okay. And not your last time, right?
I'll be back soon.
Fantastic. Look, let's get straight into it. I mean, you know, climate change is a huge conversation that is being had globally. And can you please elaborate on the purpose of the Climate Change Symposium and why we're having this particular conference today? Botswana might be asking, why are we having this particular climate change symposium with the U.S. Army?
Yes, well, it's a thrill to be here, Swift. Our BDF hosts have been very gracious as we conduct the security implications of climate change symposium. The purpose of the climate symposium is to collaborate with our African military partners.
Fantastic.
To identify gaps in understanding of climate risks and opportunities. Climate change is not a sentence. Outcomes are not decided. We can do more as militaries, and we can provide better support to our nation's governments. Events like this symposium help us build momentum.
Absolutely. You know, one thing that Botswana, I've always said, you know, we need to do a lot more education in line with climate change in order to interpret, you know, the objective of understanding how to mitigate climate change. How do we as Botswana integrate climate change into our security posture? And of course, the United States has made it very clear that climate change is a risk to national security. I mean, the Department of Defense has stated increasing temperatures, changing precipitation patterns, and more frequent, intense, and unpredictable extreme weather conditions caused by climate change are exacerbating existing risks. That's actually pretty serious. Can you touch on that for a second?
Yes, thanks, Swift. Now, there's a whole of government level to what it takes to fully address climate change. So I'm going to talk about the Botswana Defense Force alongside other partner militaries as they continue to lean forward and work against this security challenge that is affecting us on the global scale. Now, the BDF, like other African militaries, they guard a country that is rich in resources, and they're working hard to preserve them. Know that U.S. Africa Command supports each partner military's efforts to build resilience and adaptability to improve climate security. We are already working with the BDF.
Well, it's Gabs FM Power to engage your world. And if you've just joined us, welcome to the Stars and Stripes radio show, proudly brought to you by the U.S. Embassy in partnership with Gabs FM. And today we're speaking AFRICOM Climate Change Symposium in Botswana. We're discussing climate change from the context of domestic security. And of course, I have the absolute honor of speaking to Major General Kenneth Ekman. He is the Director, Strategy, Engagement and Programs, U.S. Africa Command, of course, otherwise known as AFRICOM. Let's continue the conversation. Look, General, what do you hope to achieve during this climate change symposium? Can you specifically, or can you specify how AFRICOM hopes to mitigate the climate change risk in the future, and of course enable responders in the region to do it as well? I believe we need to have some form of pay-it-forward system in line with addressing climate change.
Well, Swift, thanks so much. It is our goal to pay it forward, and we're going to do that by way of collaborating with BDF and other partner militaries to identify gaps in our understanding, to discuss climate risks, and most importantly, Swift, to develop solutions. What's important for the public to understand is the importance of climate change and what can be done to keep climate risks from becoming security realities. We can do more, and AFRICOM will continue to do more. We are in this together for the long haul, and events like this symposium and your show give the public more awareness about how militaries can contribute to climate security. So thanks so much, Swift.
Well, it's Gabs FM Power to engage your world, and of course it's an interesting conversation. We're correlating climate change, or the conversation in line with climate change, to our security posture. And of course, shout out to the BW government in partnership with the US government in line with shared security. General, thank you so much for taking this time. Before you go, I got to ask you a question that is not on your notes, okay? What is, there's a difference between a braai and a barbecue. So you must make sure you have a braai before you leave. It's our version of a barbecue, okay?
Sounds like that's an important safety tip to observe here in Habarone.
Okay?
Thank you, Swift.
Before you leave, it's part and parcel of the protocol, okay?
That's really good.
Have a fantastic day. Thank you so much, General. Let me offer you this opportunity to share your parting statement.
Swift, thanks so much, and thanks for having me on the show. I think for some of your listeners, climate change has already touched them and already hurt them and their families. To them, I would offer encouragement and hope. Events like this climate symposium are evidence that your security institutions, your militaries, understand their roles. They support your whole of government efforts to improve climate security. U.S. Africa Command is with them to ensure a more secure, stable, and prosperous Botswana and African continent. Thanks so much, Swift.
Fantastic. Well, it's Gabs FM Power to engage your world. And of course, that is the Meet America policy discussion in line with the AFRICOM Climate Change Symposium. Good afternoon.
It's the Midday Fix Reloaded. You the best. You the best. Midday Radio and its best. Best I ever had. Best I ever had.
The Stars and Stripes show is brought to you by the U.S. Embassy.
Well, it's Gabs FM Power to engage your world, and of course, you were speaking. I had the honor of speaking to Major General Kenneth Ekman. He is the Director, Strategy, Engagement and Programs for the U.S. Africa Command, otherwise known as AFRICOM. And of course, if you just joined us, the theme of today's show on the Stars and Stripes radio show is AFRICOM Climate Change Symposium that was held in Gaborone, Botswana. Look, we're going to continue conversation, and then after that, I had the honor of speaking to Suzanne Yonchi, who is the U.S. Embassy Chief Regional Environment, Science, Technology and Health Hub for Southern Africa, as well as Lieutenant Colonel Jacob Abrami, Army Attaché for the U.S. Embassy. Look out for that, and this was our conversation. It's Gabs FM Power to engage your world, and of course, welcome to the second element, or the second part of the Meet America policy discussion. And of course, I have a favorite. She goes by the name Suzanne Yonchi, U.S. Embassy Chief Regional Environment, Science, Technology and Health Hub for Southern Africa, and of course Lieutenant Colonel Jacob Abrami, Army Attaché of the U.S. Embassy. Good afternoon to the two of you.
Good afternoon, Swift.
Good afternoon. Great to be here.
Fantastic. And of course, we're going to continue conversation. Do not change that FM dial. Today, we're talking climate change, and we're talking about climate change in line with our domestic security. And let me start with you, Suzanne. You're no newcomer to the show, but for those listening to you for the first time, just touch on who you are and your mandate as well as your portfolio at the U.S. Embassy.
Sure, Swift. It's great to be back here with you and your listeners. So as my title says, I have a regional role, but I'm based here at the embassy in Gaborone. I represent the State Department's Bureau for Oceans, International, Environmental, and Scientific Affairs. We have 12 hubs around the world, and one of them is based here right in Gaborone. So I'm responsible for both Botswana and 10 Southern African countries. So I help support our embassies in all those countries on policies and programs on environment, science, technology, and health, and also make sure that we're bringing that transboundary lens to the issues, because as we've talked about before, the environment knows no borders.
Absolutely. Well, let me bring Jacob into the conversation. Jacob, just touch on your portfolio and your mandate with the U.S. Embassy in Gaborone, Botswana.
Thank you, Swift. Yeah, I work in the Defense Attaché office at the U.S. Embassy, and it's my job as the Army Attaché to represent both the United States Army and the broader Department of Defense, our equities and interests in Botswana. But primarily, I work on strengthening the partnership with the Botswana Defense Force, increasing collaboration and cooperation, and also working with your Ministry of Defense and Security.
Wow, that's interesting. I also hear you're a pilot, buddy.
I sure am a pilot. I'm fortunate to fly our C-12, which is based here in Gaborone, Botswana, and we cover 16 countries across Southern Africa.
Any chances of us taking on a test drive?
Yeah, let's talk about that after the show. We'll figure out a solution.
Fantastic. Well, moving swiftly along. Look, let's get straight into it. In Botswana, we have seen a change in temperatures that could have grave implications on food security and especially agricultural instability. Suzanne, what's your take on that? And are we really headed in the wrong direction? What can we do to mitigate that or change that? Talk to me.
Swift, you're right. We really should be concerned about changes in temperatures and the implications for the country. You know, we as the U.S. government have been really warning for a long time about the impact of climate change in Africa, and it really has become one of our top priorities, especially with regards to, you know, what you mentioned, water and food security issues. Look, Swift, I shouldn't have to remind your listeners that we are facing droughts, floods, and wildfires.
Absolutely.
And they're all the results of irregular weather patterns that have decimated the traditional means of agriculture and really worsening the food security and making it a concern for everyone. As the general said, climate change has already touched the lives of many people. So Swift, you asked about what we can do. Mm-hmm. Well, what we should do is be looking at climate change not just as a challenge, but as an opportunity to address issues like food and water insecurity. How should we build against droughts and our resilience to droughts? And how should we, look at this as an opportunity to invest in renewable energies, like promote the use of solar energy, to change the directions that we're heading. So again, this is not just a challenge, but really an opportunity.
Wow, absolutely. Well, moving swiftly along, pun intended. Look, obviously we are out at the AFRICOM Climate Symposium in Gaborone, Botswana, and it's a very interesting conversation. I never ever thought we could link climate change to domestic security. I think, in my personal opinion, it's an important conversation for all Botswana and the citizenry of this country to know and understand. Let's talk about what are the security implications of this in Botswana. In recent weeks, the United States Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, His Excellency John Kerry, has also said that climate change is a top security threat. Do you think that is the case in Gaborone, Botswana, or in the greater Botswana? How concerned should we be about this particular issue?
Thanks, Swift. You're right. Special Envoy Kerry just spoke to NATO about this very issue, very similar along the lines of what General Ekman was talking about and what we're discussing at this symposium this week. Climate change will continue to intensify, and it's going to manifest itself in the security context. So it really is important that we examine this. That's why we're really excited to see at COP28 in November. So this is the UN's big international climate conference that happens every per year. Well, for the first time, it's going to focus a day on relief, recovery, and peace. So this is going to bring that security conversation into the wider climate context and negotiations. So I know my DoD colleagues can probably speak more to security concerns, but from where I sit, we really see Botswana as a leader in regional security initiatives. So Botswana should be concerned about the security risks of climate change, given the impact that climate will have on local populations. Look, let's look at this. Food insecurity, poverty, increased disasters like drought, floods, and fires, population displacement, damage to infrastructure is even a risk of climate change, and not to mention the scarcity of natural resources. These are all elements that do threaten national security.
Well, whether you're American or Botswana, the fight or the war against climate change is a war that we have to all take on. Look, Jacob, let me bring you back into the conversation. You know, one thing that I admire about American culture is the nature of collaboration. So how does your Department of Defense and, of course, AFRICOM, working with the U.S. Embassy here in Botswana, you know, work to address climate change?
Yeah, that's a great question. We do it in several ways, and starting off is we look at what the challenge is. We assess it with our partners within the interagency. I talk with my colleague like Suzanne. I reach back to my headquarters in Washington and in AFRICOM to try to ask them, you know, what are the tools or the resources that we have? So while it may not seem like a natural fit when people are thinking about climate change to reach to the military and say, hey, what are your solutions you have for us, or what are the opportunities? There's actually a lot of ways that the Department of Defense can be a great partner in countering climate change. One of the examples of that we have here is we reached back to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and we brought a tool called Buckeye into Botswana. It's presently flying up in the Okavango Delta, and it's establishing a fantastic high-resolution data set that can be used for planning, it can be used for development, but it can also be used for disaster response. We're going to be able to create flood maps and drought warning systems with that, and we're going to share it across the interagency, not just within the United States system, but with Botswana. Our partners in Botswana will include the Okavango Research Institute based in Maun. We're going to share this with the Department of Water and Sanitation, the Civil Air Authority, and the Botswana Defense Force, just to name a few. And it will lead to future cooperation and collaboration where we explore other ways to support identifying threats, but also coming up with solutions to the challenge.
Well, it's Gabs FM Power to Engage Your World. Thank you so much to the two of you. I mean, this is a very, very important conversation. And, you know, I have learned a thing or two in terms of understanding this fight against climate change. Let me bring you back, Suzanne. Let's talk about how the U.S. government, through the U.S. Embassy, has, you know, sort of invested in the global fight against climate change here in Botswana.
Swift, you know, helping Botswana to fight the climate crisis is a major priority for us. Supporting Botswana to meet its goals of reducing emissions by 15% really is driving a lot of the work that we're doing at the embassy, as well as how to adapt to those climate change threats. You know, I've got some great examples, but I do want to say first, and I'm not just saying this because I've got my DoD colleagues in the room with me, but working with Department of Defense and AFRICOM has really been one of the highlights of my career here. To the fact that we've been working across the interagency to bring our different tools and knowledge together, and then demonstrating to Botswana's government how important it is that the interagency works together, really is motivating the work that we do. For example, some of the technical assistance that we're doing, we're using the State Department's Embassy Science Fellows Program to bring a soil expert from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to sit with Botswana's National Agriculture Research and Development Institute, go over its soil surveys to really look at how climate has changed the sediment makeup and how that's impacting agriculture here in Botswana. On policy also related to agriculture, you know, we were talking about food security and just the impact that climate has had. Farmers need tools, and you can't adapt to climate if you don't have the right tools. So we've been working with the Ministry of Agriculture to develop a framework to allow farmers to use biotechnology so that they can use that drought resilience, drought resistance technology to further their crop production. We also work at the grassroots level. The State Department, we have a really neat grant to the Botswana Climate Change Network, which is addressing renewable energies and actually helping those women who have been dependent on collecting firewood and selling it for cooking purposes to instead use that momentum and that entrepreneurship to develop a renewable energy business. So how to sell solar-powered cook stoves, for example, which will help reduce emissions. And I know our ambassador was on your show recently and talked about the priority that he places on helping Botswana realize the solar potential in this country. Botswana is spending millions of dollars importing electricity and energy, and really, I mean, there's 360 days of sunlight in this country. So really, we are working with the government of Botswana to realize that potential. And Swift, we don't just talk the talk, we are committed to walking the walk. I think the ambassador told you about the solar panels that we're putting on the roof of his residence here in Gabs.
Yes, he did.
So soon people will be able to walk by and see that for themselves. And we've even started a competition at the embassy to see who can reduce their energy bills the most by turning off the lights in their homes and at the embassy. So we really are committed to helping Botswana meet its climate change ambitions.
Well, it's Gabs FM Power to Engage. Well, I think to add on to that, Suzanne, one thing that I admire is the integrated approach between, your Department of Defense and your environmental office, and bring it together sort of like a collaborative teamwork approach. I think that one is amazing. Jacob, let me bring you back into the conversation. From your point of view, is there anything you'd like to add on, of course, in line with the investment that the U.S. government is doing for the Republic of Botswana?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. As Suzanne highlighted, there's many ways we can work together. And while this discussion is focused directly on climate, I also want to kind of tie in one of our other areas that's a focus for the Department of Defense, and that's science, technology, and innovation as key to facing challenges that are in front of us. One of the ways we do that is for basic and applied research grants. And so it just so happens that here in Botswana, at the Botswana International University of Science and Technology, one of those grants is going into effect. And that grant is being used to study animal movement patterns. And that is artificial intelligence. It may not seem like it's directly linked, but when we understand these animal movement patterns, that can be used to help with both conservation, planning, as well as for security, because the Botswana Defense Force can use that in their counter-poaching mission along with the Department of Wildlife National Parks. So that's just one example, those basic and applied research grants, and they're available to anyone who's an aspiring student at an advanced level that wants to submit an application. We can review that application, and then we can try to get them in the fight one way or another as best we can.
Well, it's Gabs FM Power to Engage Your World. And of course, thank you so much. We have the Stars and Stripes radio show proudly brought to you by the U.S. Embassy in Gaborone, Botswana, in partnership with Gabs FM, #America in Botswana. And we've taken the show on the road. I am out at the AFRICOM Climate Symposium out here in Gaborone, Botswana. Jacob, let me offer you this opportunity to share your parting statements. And of course, Suzanne, I will bring you into the conversation.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for having our team on the show. The event that we're holding out here is near and dear to my heart, just as a person who's a resident on this planet, but also as someone residing in Botswana right now. There's amazing natural resources here in this beautiful country. I'm a fan of the Delta, the Kalahari, the Limpopo. I travel around it as frequently as I can, and I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to work with my colleagues to try to identify the ways that we can best support our partners and the broader world.
Absolutely, and me and you are going jet flying soon. But anyway, moving swiftly along, pun intended, thank you so much. And of course, if you're wondering, you are speaking to Lieutenant Colonel Jacob Abrami, Army Attaché at the U.S. Embassy. Suzanne, let me offer you this opportunity to share your parting statement.
Thanks, Swift. No, it's been really great to be here at the symposium. It's another great example of our interagency cooperation, and we really look forward to moving that forward and sharing those experiences with our partners. The fighting the climate crisis, tackling it is a priority for the Biden-Harris administration and for our embassy here. And we really appreciate that Botswana is also making that a priority and looking forward to more engagements on this. So thanks so much, Swift.
You're absolutely welcome. And of course, I'm swallowing my words. Forgive me there. But obviously, it's Gabs FM Power to engage your world. And thank you so much. Let's remember that climate change is not an American problem. It's not a Botswana problem. It is our problem as members of, humanity. AFRICOM Climate Change Symposium. Thank you so much to Suzanne Yonchi, U.S. Embassy Chief, Regional Environment, Science, Technology and Health Hub for Southern Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon.
On air, online, power to engage your world. Gabs FM.
The Stars and Stripes show is brought to you by the U.S. Embassy.
Well, it's Gabs FM, power to engage your world, and welcome back to the Stars and Stripes radio show, proudly brought to you by the U.S. Embassy, talking climate change and the Climate Change Symposium. And of course, in the building he is a 2016 fellow, and of course, this man is shot recently, well, not recently, over a year ago. So he shot a climate change documentary in Botswana, and of course, it's a docu-series. Yes, you're absolutely right. And this man, I hold him in high regard. He's not wearing his hip-hop hat today. He is an advocate for youth as Zeus continues to work with different national, regional, and of course, hey, the wife is phoning this side, but it's okay. It's order and chaos in the show, okay? And of course, regional and international organizations, partners for, social change in African communities. The man is passionate about climate change. Welcome to the show, brother.
Thank you, sir. And I will put on the hip hop hat too, because
nice.
hip hop's origins were community empowerment. So this to me speaks directly to that, and a very interesting subject to dig into. I must say it's a very what I would consider an emerging area in the space in terms of climate change and climate action, especially for us in parts of the world like Botswana. To be very frankly honest, still maybe a bit behind in terms of certain parts of the response. Certain things we might be ahead of, though, not to downplay that.
Yeah.
I think the phrasing for me was very interesting. When you think national security, usually it evokes, military talk and all of that.
Yes.
So I was happy to hear other things that I feel like for me, kind of connect to the issue, like issues like food security. Obviously when people can't eat, you have the potential for things to go south, uprisings and the like. So
absolutely.
I like the approach that looks at adaptation and mitigation strategies as preventative, right? So, and by the way, I think it's important to note as well, the military is not a standalone organ. Obviously as part of government, the tone from government policy becomes very strong, and how the military will be able to respond is almost a function of how the entire government is responding.
I like that. One thing that stands out for me is the integrated approach. The ability to build a framework that allows you to touch on military, agriculture, and the different facet of the impacts of climate change.
Yeah, I mean, at the core of this for me, I think it's also important to put climate justice at the forefront, because it's always important to have a full context for, how did we get here? How are we going to address the situation? I mean, we've seen African leaders cry a lot already about, what seem to be now empty promises from the West around, funds for adaptation and mitigation. Loss and damage last year was an agenda item, developing world had to fight to put onto at COP,
Absolutely.
So I think, it's very, very important to ensure that all these things are considered when we have these types of conversations, I mean, from a case study level, it was interesting I've been aware of an area like the Sahel for some time, and preparing for this, watching some of that, seeing some of the news reports from there, it's really, really important, I think, for us as a country to pay attention to what's going on elsewhere, because trends are easy to spot early on. And one thing that keeps coming up, and you heard it even in the recordings, the way of life we have in terms of subsistence farming, livestock rearing, and a bit of farming, in terms of crop production. And how we approach all of this. I get it, a lot of our livestock, they graze essentially out in the wild and
Free grazing.
Free grazing, exactly. And then what we're doing as well to the lands we plow on, after a certain period, we tell what even soils are losing nutrients, desertification is a real thing, as animals finish shrub and vegetation around. So you're starting to get a serious competition for resources, water, of course. And I want us also to think about this issue not just as in regional conflict with other countries, but what's emerged is even internally. You have displacement happening. There's tensions and fights for resources, water being one of the biggest. Cameroon was an interesting example that I saw in a report, where you have refugees now moving to Chad. By the way, climate refugee is a interesting term, again, an expression that I heard. So I think it's very important for us to consider what all of these different elements mean and how we're going to compile them in changing and building an approach what is going to be sustainable and will truly bring impact.
Well, it's Gabs FM, power to engage your world. 3956962. If you want to join in the conversation, especially I like what you said, the backdrop of food security is something that we have to discuss. And of course, I like the fact that the Botswana Defense Force was actually part and parcel of the climate change symposium. And, obviously that speaks to capacitating our defense force and our military to understand what climate change, how does it threaten you, me, and I, and of course our family members. Let's talk about translating, and this is something that I've had a conversation with you. Climate change seems to be a school of thought for Banaba private school.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying?
It's been elitist.
It's been elitist for a very, very long time.
Sure.
How would you translate, climate change to Botswana to say, look at this way. This is why this is important, not only from a policy point of view, your State of Nation address, your various, government platforms that we are used to, your budget speech. This is why we need to include some form of or allocate resources towards mitigating climate change.
Look, first and foremost, what I find interesting and what I found to be an education as we were shooting season 1, for instance, was that, but Tobacco Gai actually understand climate change a whole lot more than we think. It's just that obviously their terminology and their phrasing is not from the playbook, it's from the West. So that's why I think it's very important to frame issues like you're saying from language to also even looking at indigenous knowledge systems. They have been explaining some of this phenomena for centuries. So I think that's a big part of the conversation. And they own these issues. I feel like it's not hard to relate a story like I just did now about subsistence farming, about the competition for resources from land to water, about soil nutrition, all those things. They live these stories, so they understand them much better than even we do in urban areas. I always point to Professor Atlopeng speaking how you understand climate change is often dependent on also your surroundings. Are you insulated from things? So do you think, vegetables come from the supermarket or do they come from out the ground? So when you understand those types of perspectives, I really believe there's no, I don't have to say need to try and talk down to people in rural areas. The key thing is just also having them drive some of this content created to in the way that they would best relate to.
Absolutely. It's Gabs FM, power to engage your world. On the other side of this, we're going to continue conversation. And of course, you're on the Stars and Stripes radio show, proudly brought to you by the U.S. Embassy. And of course, in partnership with Gabs FM, hashtag climate change, hashtag climate justice. Look out for the conversation coming your way shortly.
Building property or road? Come to Bela Bela Quarries for the best quality in all aggregates of concrete stone, crushed sand or dust, and road stone in Botswana. We perform on-site multiple tests on our products daily to ensure quality. We are also part of a JSE listed group that has been in construction business since 1974. Don't wait. Call us now on 572-9477 or 71380745, or you can call 7230-7630 to place an order or to get a free quotation, or you can simply visit our quarry, that 10 right after you pass Pakalani 10 off. Bela Bela Quarries, super quality stone and sand.
The Stars and Stripes show is brought to you by the U.S. Embassy.
Well, it's Gabs FM, powered to engage your world. And of course, welcome back to the Stars and Stripes radio show, proudly brought to you by the U.S. Embassy. And of course, on our partner Spotlight, we speak to James Zeus Banzi, talking about climate change symposium, of course, that recently happened in Gaborone, Botswana. Zeus, your last words in line with climate change, in line with the importance of creating what we call a paradigm shift, and obviously, highlighting the importance of understanding that climate change does not affect only the American people, but Botswana and the world at large.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's bringing back connections to the issues of national security. I think it's very interesting, for instance, that I heard one expert, an American guy, speak about how, often the issue of climate change, brings the two parties to loggerheads, right? Like from Democrats to Republicans.
Yes.
But when they speak of climate change within the context of national security, it's often a big bipartisan issue. So everybody takes interest in that. And to me, that makes sense because around the world, everywhere, security is obviously a big thing. I think just on a philosophical level, it's important to consider, is the world, in terms of shaping a response, and organizations, are we moving in a scarcity mindset kind of way where we're trying to hog resources, almost in an imperialist fashion? Or are we moving in an abundance kind of mindset that allows us to develop more solutions, right? I'm very interested in the research and development components of the conversation.
Absolutely.
We've been knowing for a long time that, for instance, the American military is huge in terms of R&D, and they invest a lot into that. And a lot of technologies that even make it into mainstream consumer markets, some of them come from that space. So I think it's a very interesting thing to look at. First and foremost, as a big hippie, I want to see investment into solutions for the world and not into weapons, right? Because we all know the whole military industrial complex has become a real problematic thing, which, again, going back to government policy, ends up being underpinned by the nature of diplomacy. So I think, and especially as Botswana, I always say we must remember, we're a country, we have a defense force, first and foremost, right? Big difference to an army. And if you think about where we come from, 1966, how much of a hot zone this region was. From apartheid down south to, Zimbabwe, up north, Rhodesia, actually, Mozambique, Angola. If it wasn't for very, very skilled and very, very humane diplomacy from our founding fathers, I think we would have been, the situation could have gone south. This country could look very, very different. So again, learning from our expertise and some of our own skills and knowledge, I think it's important to not leave diplomacy behind in this whole conversation, right? Yeah.
Well,
by the way,
yes.
as back to the point of research and development,
yes.
I think it'd be very interesting to see where we are as a defense force in terms of issues of technologies that speak to climate change adaptation and mitigation, and then one of the big things coming from a art space, intellectual property. A lot of times this technology is developed and it's owned by the military, regardless of wherever they are. And I think at certain points it's very important to be able to create more open source material, license out things, waiver certain commercial rights so that, people are able to benefit. And while we're there also, last closing thought.
Yes.
There's actually a big movement right now, which is also scrutinizing militaries themselves, as in their carbon footprint. So from your bases, to your operations, processes, systems, I think it's very, very important that, they use a lot of that capacity to be able to also show what adaptation and mitigation in that industry and that sector looks like.
Powerful stuff. It's Gabs FM, power to engage your world. On the other side of this, we're going to continue conversation. And of course, we will be speaking to Education USA Botswana advisor, and of course, touching on what that particular office. Shout out to Zeus. Thank you so much for, the knowledge that you're dropping, and of course, educating and informing Botswana that this issue of climate change is our problem.
Yep.
It's a national problem. It's a global problem. Docu-series, how is that doing? Where can we watch it? What?
Yeah.
Talk to me.
Okay. So we did our first run on BTV1.
Okay,
and
nice.
we finished in February.
Nice.
Unfortunately, we didn't get a repeat. I tried to fight for a repeat.
Yeah.
We didn't get a repeat run, but we're in the process of finishing negotiations with BTV News so that we can possibly get slots on the main news channel as well.
Nice.
I still believe in public broadcaster first because, yes, this is very much a public issue. We're still trying to figure out where we can house it, like say on an app or whatever, instead of necessarily a streaming service, say what has a pay gate.
Yes.
So yeah, these are the headaches of my life.
Fantastic. Have a great day, brother.
Thank you.
Let's move along swiftly. On the other side of this, we're going to continue conversation. Do not change that FM dial.
The Stars and Stripes show is brought to you by the U.S. Embassy.
Well, it's Gabs FM, power to engage your world. Welcome back to the show. And of course, this is one of our all-time favorite segments. It goes by the name Chasing the Dream. And of course, this is where you get to understand Education USA office. This affords you opportunities from an academic level, from a professional level, to study or engage in various scholarships in the United States. And of course, we have none other than Oabile Tau, who is Education USA Botswana advisor. How are you, boss lady?
I'm doing awesome. I'm doing fantastic. It's been a while.
It's been a while. Where have you been? Crisscrossing the country, educating, and obviously trying to get Botswana to engage with your office?
Obviously, because right now, I put on two hats.
Yes.
So I'm into education, but also opening doors and opportunities. And so I've been around the country. Just last week I was in Sabong.
Nice.
I went to the tip of Botswana.
Wow.
Still talking about, study abroad.
Yes.
Still talking about, how about we give you some money for a project?
Yes,
How
community
about that?
development.
Exactly.
Look, what do you have for us today? Well, unfortunately, I can only give you 3 minutes, my friend.
No problem. And because I get 3 minutes, allow me to say this. If you are looking for opportunities to go study in the US, please log on to www.educationusa.state.gov.
Nice,
right?
nice,
So,
nice.
or just, call us at 395-3982, and then they will literally give you an office where you can ask all questions. But today I just want to talk to, we're just, we had returning alumni.
Yes.
From one of our exchange programs on energy, and because of what Zuza said, I want to call out to all USG alumni and tell them we have funding opportunity available to you. Yay!
Okay, fantastic.
So the mission of Botswana is happy to announce that we have an open call for alumni of US government-sponsored exchange programs. So you have an opportunity to actually apply for funding of up to 20,000 to actually advance US missions and objectives. So if you have a project that covers fostering culture and entrepreneurship, basically if you have a project that promotes or develops best practice in business and entrepreneurship, do apply. If you have a project that empowers women and girls in civil society and public service, this is for you. Projects that promote opportunities for education, but particularly for underrepresented or marginalized groups. This is an opportunity for you. And obviously, we're looking into climate change.
Yay.
So if you have any project that addresses mitigating the effects of climate change in Botswana, please log on to bw.usembassy.gov and find out about the current notice for funding opportunities for alumni funding for FY20. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Short and sweet. So basically, another thing is that if anybody would like to engage you, all they need to do is obviously Google Education USA in Botswana. And of course, they can engage your office. You have an open door policy. You're more than willing to speak to parents, to schools about the opportunities to study abroad.
And I'm welcome to invitations. So please just drop me an email and call us, and we will make an arrangement to come and address you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's the Stars and Stripes radio show, proudly brought to you by the U.S. Embassy in partnership with Gabs FM, #climate change. Thank you so much. And of course, remember, let's do our part. Plant a tree, pick up litter, do something within the power that you have for a better globe for all.
The Stars and Stripes show was brought to you by the U.S. Embassy.